Hi, this is Mr. Gideon. So now that we've answered the question, what is aggregate supply, we want to talk about what can cause the aggregate supply curve to change. And as we've said many times before, make sure you're careful. There's a difference between saying a change in quantity supplied and a change in supply. If we're talking about a change in quantity supplied, we're talking about taking an existing curve like this one and just sliding from one point to another along that curve, because price level changes. Price level increases or decreases will go from one point to another along an existing curve. But we're not talking about that in this section. We're talking about something more significant than price level changing and necessitating an entire curve being redrawn. An entire curve like this one being redrawn to the left because now supply has decreased, or an entire curve like this one being redrawn to the right because now supply has increased. These are some of those factors that would cause a curve to be redrawn. And it's very similar in mentality to what we talked about with regards to good news and bad news for suppliers, for producers, in the case of the market supply curve. So let's take a look at this. Let's say wage rates change. These are the rates that the average laborer would merit or be able to get in the marketplace. If wage rates go down, you're a supplier, think like one of these suppliers on the SORAS curve, then which way would your supply change? Would you increase or decrease your supply? Most likely you'd be able to increase your supply because workers got cheaper. But if wage rates increased across the entire economy, or at least on average, then supply would decrease and the entire SORAS curve would have to be drawn to the left. There are other kinds of inputs, of course, for suppliers, producers. The most expensive is wages or other kinds of payments and benefits to laborers. But let's say some other input, a non-labor input, decreases in price. Let's say that the price of oil, which is used by many suppliers across an entire economy, decreases. Then that would cause suppliers to increase their supply because they can afford to put more resources that they used to put towards oil, whether it's in the production process or the transportation process, into producing the actual product that they want to sell or service perhaps. If the prices of non-labor inputs increases, then SORAS is going to decrease. Productivity. If productivity increases, so does the supply of all products and services across an economy. If productivity declines, then SORAS will shift to the left. Supply shock is the last factor. Supply shock can be a positive or negative. If there's a beneficial supply shock, what we're talking about is some unexpected positive discovery typically. Let's say we discover more oil in the United States, which of course is an important input. That's an example of a beneficial supply shock. What would happen to supply across the entire economy in the US then if we discovered new supplies of oil? SORAS would shift to the right. We would have an increase in supply. If there was an adverse supply shock, let's stick with oil, let's say that there was significant damage to oil refineries in the United States because terrorists bombed pipelines or production facilities. That of course is a negative shock to our supply, and SRAS would shift to the left. Just like we did with AD, we have another summary diagram, and at the end of this section now we can kind of bring together the factors that shift aggregate demand and aggregate supply together, and I like this summary exhibit to remind us of all the different things that could affect either curve and cause them to be redrawn as they shift from the left to the right. And this is another way to kind of comprehensively visualize the changes that can take place across an entire economy and cause AD and SORAS to shift, and then ultimately, of course, change the price level and the quantity, because equilibrium will be changing. And that's an important piece as we move forward. In the next couple of lessons, next several lessons in fact, we're going to be talking about theories about how to improve an economic picture. As we've said before, let's say we've got this spot is the spot of our potential, but we're not, as an economy, in that spot. Currently, or in the short run, SRAS and AD are intersecting to the left of that. What situation is that? That's a recession, or a recessionary gap. Well, ceteris paribus, if one or more of the factors that we've discussed recently would cause one or both of these curves to shift, then that would be good news. We've talked about beneficial supply shock, for instance. If that was to occur, then that's one of many factors that can cause us to get back closer to our potential, because it would cause SRAS to shift right. Maybe we're not completely there yet, but to get the rest of the way there, some other factor with AD shifts. Let's say that for demand, consumption increases, or one of those subcomponents that we talked about of consumption. That could do the rest of the work, and then we can get to where our natural potential is. But how can we influence these factors is a subject of a lot of economic debate amongst prevalent theorists, and we'll come to that very shortly.